And Joseph Scott Morgan, there's going to be a lot of forensic evidence in this case. We have Maggie and Paul, mother and son, murdered on June 7th, 2021. Also shot with two different firearms. The state alleges, though, it's one shooter. What's the challenge going to be there?
I think trying to wrap your head around the fact that two long arms, not a pistol and a shotgun or a pistol and a rifle were used, but a shotgun and a rifle. These are shoulder-fired weapons, and from my experience, where you have multiple weapons involved and you're talking about one shooter, there's an idea of transition that has to take place between the use of these two weapons, and so it's very cumbersome. And again, I think that the defense is going to utilize that bit of information to at least instill possible in the minds of others that there might be other people involved, because this is very difficult to manage. With the shotgun alone, one of the interesting things for me, at least, is the fact that you don't just have one type of ammunition that's being fired from the shotgun. You have two. You have birdshot and buckshot, which again is fascinating, because most of the time when someone loads up a weapon, particularly a shotgun, you're going to use one type of ammunition consistently. The fact that there were two is quite compelling, I think. So there's going to be a lot to pick through. You're going to have dynamic blood evidence that's going to be involved, trace evidence that's going to be involved, those sorts of things.
Yeah, the two long guns is confounding to me, both the rifle and the shotgun, and the fact that we have two victims in somewhat close proximity to one another. Maggie sadly found on the outside of the dog kennel, and then Paul found inside in that storage room area. Okay, let's get to some of your questions. We have some great questions coming in. Again, keep them coming on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook, and we will get to them, as many of them as we can. Our first question comes from D. Turner from YouTube, and I guess Joseph and Linda, either one of you could answer this question. I'll throw it to you, Joseph. Did they find either long gun?
To the best of my knowledge, they have not found the rifle. I'm unsure about the shotgun at this point in time, so I can't answer that in the affirmative. Again, we're waiting for a lot of this information to come out.
Most definitely. And Gigi, our next question comes from JRS1 from YouTube. How many years behind bars is he facing if found guilty, Alex Murdaugh?
Life in prison. They opted not to go after the death penalty, and that is in addition to the hundreds of years he's already facing for the financial crimes that he's accused of.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, I think this is a really good question because, we topped off the hour talking about what a small jury pool it is there in Colleton County, and the fact that you have Alex Murdaugh, a fourth generation of this legal dynasty. They've had massive control over the court system and politics in that county for years now, almost a century, if not a little bit longer. Why did they not change venue in this case? I think that could cut both ways, right?
Right. It's a really interesting question because it's very much like the case we're seeing in Idaho. Where do you put this case in South Carolina that there's not going to be some kind of tentacles from that family? And the case is known everywhere, right? So I think that the attorneys felt that they could weed out, and the judge also, those that had that great bias, that knew the family, right? That said, no, we've had dealings with the father, the grandfather, we've had dealings with him, our kids go to school with their kids, that they could get rid of those, and who's ever left may be the pool that would be fairest. And remember, it's not unusual not to change venue anymore. The courts are really going against that. They may move it a county over here or there, but they're not really, interested in like moving it to, 3 counties away and busing jurors and all. So I do think that it will work out, and I think that the court knows what they're doing here.
Well, and that judicial district there, the 14th Judicial District, where Alex Murdaugh's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all the solicitor, which is a district attorney or prosecutor, as a lot of us would know it. That's really like a 5-county area. So you'd really maybe have to be moving this thing clear across the state. And they must think they can get a jury in Colleton County. So I have another question for you, Linda, because we were just talking about this, the four of us, before we went on the air. And I know that you know a lot about this stuff, as does Joseph. And this has to do with the ballistics in this case. This comes from Melissa Dotson from YouTube. Linda, how significant do you think the judge's ruling was on allowing the ballistics expert's testimony? And this has to do with that motions hearing we had yesterday, in which he was questioned about how he was able to render this opinion about those 300 blackout rounds and the type of gun from which they were fired when he doesn't have the gun, when he doesn't have the rifle.
Oh, Melissa, thank you for that question, because I love talking about this area. I spent several days cross-examining a firearms examiner in the Aaron Hernandez case when we had a not guilty on the double homicide there on these same issues. Now, the judges are always going to allow the firearms tool mark identification, it's actually called, as opposed to ballistics, which is the movement of the bullets in the air. The firearms identification, tool mark identification in, because it's pretty much been accepted in the communities, except that in the scientific area, there has been an attack in the past, I should say, from 2009 on, that indeed it's a subjective determination whether cartridges and shell casings match each other and or match a weapon, and that there's no statistical foundation or error rates for the identification by the experts for the state. So I don't think that the motion or the decision by the court allowing it in is significant, because I think if the defense is going to make their case, they're going to do it in front of the jury in ways that the jury can understand. They were expecting it. But it's going to be an interesting case, isn't it? And maybe it doesn't come down to those matches. Maybe it comes down to everything else.
And it very well could come down to everything else. Back to those firearms, though, Joseph, I thought it was interesting yesterday, and I expected Judge Newman, who's a pretty by-the-book judge from what we've seen in other cases, I expected him to allow that testimony in. I didn't think he wouldn't not. He was just going to say, look, that's up to the jury to decide. They hear it and give it whatever weight it's worth. But it is interesting to me that he was able to kind of opine on this without having that rifle to use as the gun to test from.
Yeah, and one interesting little aside here is that apparently other casings were found at the scene. Remember, this is an isolated rural area. They had an area where they would fire weapons, and there were other 300 blackout casings that were apparently found at the scene. So in the absence of a weapon, the actual weapon, and this is all circumstantial, please understand that. If you find those casings at the scene, okay, that may be weathered, more weathered than those that are around the body, you could take an intellectual opinionated leap here and say, well, we compared those casings with the ones we found adjacent to the body. We know that he owned a 300 blackout. We can't put our hands on it, but again, circumstantially, how do you explain that away? And I think that that's something that the defense is not going to have as hard a time attacking as they would if they actually had the physical weapon, the rifle, in their hands. But it does set up quite interesting, though, doesn't it? Because, you've got this, and what we're talking about here are not the projectiles themselves, the actual bullet that comes out of the end of the weapon. What they're looking for are going to be the markings that are going to be on the casing that's left behind, that soft brass casing or soft metal casing. You're looking for extractor marks and ejector marks. This is a semi-automatic weapon, so there's a whole mechanism that comes into play to throw that empty shell or hull away and reload another one in there. And there's very distinctive markings. Now, they are not as distinctive and identifiable, say for instance, as the rifling that you see on the projectile that travels down the twist and the turns of the barrel. But yet, this has been recognized in court, as Linda had mentioned, and it's going to be a fight. It will be a dogfight in the courtroom. I'll be interested to see who the defense brings in as an expert in this case to kind of, counterpunch with this.
You made a lot of interesting points. I am really looking forward to seeing who the defense brings in, because defense attorneys love to attack the ballistics evidence. They love to attack all of the evidence, but I think they particularly like to attack that area, that field of forensics. Also, the fact that they did find shell casings with similar markings at the shooting range on that property. Gigi, our next question, I'm going to throw this one to you because you've actually been in the courtroom and you've been outside too, just getting a look at everything. This comes from Incognito from YouTube. Incognito asks, has Alex Murdaugh had any support from extended family members at this time to support a verdict of innocent or not guilty, or do they side with the prosecution? What are you kind of seeing as you sit in that courtroom?
Well, yesterday I sat directly behind his sister, who was there. He seemed very happy to see her, thanked her for coming, told her he loved her. But so far yesterday, she was the only family member that I saw in that courtroom. So he was she was there and seemed to be nodding her head yes when the defense would talk. So it seems like she is agreeing that he didn't do this, at least by her body language and nodding her head every time the defense made a point that was in his favor.
Definitely. And no matter what you think of this case, you know, a family, a sibling a woman sticking by her brother, you know, everybody needs some support no matter what they're going through in this world. All right, we want you to keep those questions coming on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and on our YouTube chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can. For now, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are here watching Law and Crime as we cover jury selection in the trial of Alex Murdaugh.